Welcome to Thinkin, Bros. I'm Chris.
And I'm Alex.
We're your favorite corner store philosophers trying to figure out life one conundrum at a time. And today we have a very special guest. You have a cool backstory. You started off as a university student, then you were exposed to the hustle culture, and you were like, you know what? I'm going to become a freelance candle salesman. And now here you are, a fascinating story that deserves an episode on its own. We might just have one. So do you want to present yourself really quick?
Yeah, sure, Bean. So I'm Phil. Like he said, I just graduated from McGill. Right now I'm selling plant-based candles with my friends. And I just like thinking about stuff, like the Thinkin Bros. So here we are thinking.
Awesome. Everything is on brand. So today we're going to be talking about what we deserve, how we use the word deserve usually in society, just like modern representations of, I don't think it's certainly a defined concept in philosophy. Maybe it's called desert, I think, but it's a philosophical concept. But today we're just going to be like exploring how we use the word deserve and what it should really mean, and maybe contrasting it with blameworthiness, because I think we'll get what I think about it. So first we're going to be talking about the positive ways we use deserve, and it is my intuition that the way we should use it is when someone has accomplished something and their efforts make them kind of deserve a certain outcome. But I've also thought about it more, and in certain situations where the outcome is a fulfillment of basic human needs, I think you don't have to do anything to deserve it. Such as, let's say you're born as a handicapped person and you have special parking space that you didn't do anything to deserve it, but if you didn't have it, it would seem unfair. Any initial thoughts on the concept, how we use deserve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to begin with, I think it's good to start with asking, what do you want from society to begin with? And I think a lot of people think that they want a world that's just, where people get what they deserve. But I think there's something more important to that. I think this concept of deserving stuff is in service to something else. So when I think about it, I think to myself, okay, if I could have the society I wanted, exactly with everything I wanted, what would it be? And my answer to that is, I would have a society where everyone's happy all the time and just not suffering, right? But then that's impossible. Okay, so what do we do in the real world? Well, in order to get there, we reward people who work hard. We reward people who act in a way that gets us there. And we punish behavior that gets us away from there. Behavior that makes people suffer, behavior that's painful to endure, etc. So that's why, for me, there's no sense in depriving people of special needs that they could use to better society, like handicap spots or water or food, etc. Because, first of all, depriving people of those makes them suffer especially a lot. It's not like a golden trophy. It's water. You need it. And second of all, they can't function without it. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, so I think that's the practical importance of accurately defining desert and adapting it to people. For the practical application of desert, which, as Phil just said, is useful in society because it motivates people to do good stuff. When you do a good deed, or when you deserve blame for something, you should be punished for it. When you do a good deed, you deserve praise and maybe rewards for it. So maybe the use of this episode is going to be to dispel some misconceptions about the word desert, or
Deserve.
yeah, about what people deserve, because, as we just said, it's important practical applications.
Okay, so can you actually explain to me a little bit what dessert means? Because I just asked ChatGPT, gave me a huge thing. So just in your own words, what is dessert? Because I've actually never heard of this.
Okay, for me, it's just a fancy way of rendering deserving a noun. That's all it is. And making it a philosophical concept. The thing about our podcast is we're trying to make it accessible and practical, okay? If we get into, what Kant thinks about dessert, or desserts, right? It's kind of off-brand, so I would love to explain it. I just know it's a word that exists. Now, what we're going to try to do is draw out intuitions about what we think the word "you deserve this" should be about in either your perfect society, but also to make it practical a better version of our society. That's fair. Okay, so I think one way people use "I deserve this" is I deserve to be treated with respect. So we're going to be starting with the positive side of it. Then we're going to be talking about when someone does something bad and you're saying, you deserve this. And we have a little backstory with Alex when we were in Czech Republic. I think it's pretty revelatory. So we were in the hotel gym and this 6'6", bald, meathead, 260-pound guy walks in. We look at each other, we're a little stressed, and his son follows him closely after he enters, and they start shadow boxing with weights. The most Russian workout you can think about, probably suboptimal, but he'll probably be a world champion someday, right? So, and with Alex, we're like, okay, that's definitely a Russian. And then he asks us a question about where some piece of equipment is, and we answer. And then something else happens, and I think his wife wanted to join him, but she needed a key to enter the gym, and we opened the door with our key. And so when he exited the gym, he smiled at us. And I think that taught us a valuable lesson about what we deserve. Because here in Western culture, people think they deserve to be smiled at. That's part of, what do you call it? Common decency. But what I realized in going in Europe to Europe is that we worked for that smile. He didn't know. We might have been serial killers, right? Before he knew us, but then he talked to us. He kind of got our vibe. We were helpful to him in identifying equipment, and then we got a smile out of him. And to me, that's what deserving kind of is. Beyond minimal human needs, that's what, even for a single smile, that's what you should be doing. So I think people exaggerate the extent of dessert. And unless you want to say something, I can just get you going on something else. Okay. So based on this, all right, we don't live in a perfect society. Not everyone gets what they deserve. So here's another story. My friend, who's a musical artist, puts a lot of effort into his songs. 40 hours, right? Up to 40 hours. And he's not getting that many views. But we noticed this trend on TikTok where if you just kind of follow the trends, you give yourself to what the people want. You do Travis Scott remixes, right? Something that is not you, but is going to get you clicks. And my initial intuition is to say, well, look, my friend deserves more. He's putting those 40 hours into something and he's creating something beautiful. But the reality of the world is that something beautiful doesn't have a market for it. So my intuition here is, does he really deserve more? Or because he's not playing by the rules, contrarily to some TikTok kids that are putting 10 hours into a single Travis Scott remix and getting 10 times his views, is his effort, if it's directed towards the thing that is not certainly going to get him results, does he deserve more? Or should he just play by the rules like everyone else?
Boy, that's a good question. And there's a lot to unpack there. Because instinctually, I feel like saying that if you're producing something that brings joy to you and feels authentic to you, but it doesn't bring value to anybody else, then nobody, you know what I mean? Nobody's beholden to pay you back for that. Like, you're not providing value. Why should you get paid for that? Right. And then in the same way, I can ask, if you're doing it really for yourself, then you shouldn't mind not getting paid for it, right? Whereas if you're doing it for other people, then, you get paid back. So that's my instinctual reaction, is to speak kind of against that. But at the same time, I think the market is rigged in a way, meaning that people don't necessarily consume what they enjoy, and they don't necessarily pay for things that they actually want. For example, I'm going to use a different example, drugs, right? People use drugs a lot, and people pay a lot of money for drugs. But that doesn't mean that those people actually value those drugs or wish that those drugs were in their system and in their proximity, right? So there's kind of a disconnect between what goes in the market and what makes money and what people actually want, surprisingly. And I think TikTok is one of those things where people get sucked into reels, right? And they just consume. And then later they look back on that and they regret it. They say, I wish I didn't consume it. I wish I didn't have such easy access to this. I wish it was blocked. I wish I would have done something else. And maybe that something else would have been listening to your friend's music or reading some other piece of literature that, is not so popular in the market. So
maybe the answer is that your friend is getting exactly what he deserves, right? Which is few but meaningful views and listens from people that actually enjoy it and listen to music for the meaning it brings to their life. Would he really want millions of views from people that just get dopamine from listening to him? It's sure more rewarding, or it could not be, actually. As you said, Phil, it could just be rewarding to make the music and make meaningful music much more than a person that just remixes something that's not theirs. I think in the long term, especially, you kind of feel empty because you've done nothing with your life but profit off of other people's success and talent also. So you have no real talent of your own. And so maybe he's getting exactly what he deserves.
Yeah, so at that point, I feel like the concept of deserve starts to break down, because I think deserving or deserts is one of those things that we that we speak of for the sake of convenience. It's not really a reality that's out there and that's tangible, right? It's I hate this term, but it's a social construct in a way, right? And what I would say about that is that I don't know, that's a tough one. It depends on what your friend wants to achieve with that music, right? If his goal is his own personal catharsis and whatever, then he doesn't need anything. But if his goal is to reach people in a way that's deep and that's going to change their lives in big or smaller ways, then yeah, you can say that he would prefer to have less views that are more meaningful. But now at the end of the day, I think the question is, how good should he feel about himself for doing what he's doing? Should he feel like an unproductive loser because nobody's watching his stuff? Or should he feel good because he's doing something that's meaningful despite the fact that it's not reaching as many people as he would like to? And that's a question that, I don't know, takes a lot of reflection and prayer to figure out for each person's self.
Yeah, but if we look to psychology, internally driven motivation always seems to be more profitable for you. So it seems as though erring on the side of I'm doing this for myself anyways, you're going to get what you deserve, because if you're, let's say, you're running to lose weight to impress someone, and I don't know, you get an injury and then you can't impress that someone, well, you're going to be sad about it. But if you're running for yourself and the thing that is giving you pleasure is the running itself, then you're never going to be disappointed, because the result of you running is always going to be you having run. On the other side, it seems as though desert is concretizing itself as getting what you expect from your actions, right? Upon being informed about how the world works, let's say you brought up a good point. The system is rigged to give people not what they necessarily need, but spike their dopamine, whatever they're going to do, whatever is going to get them addicted. But once you have that in mind, your expectations can be much clearer. If you're making, if you're writing philosophy books in this day and age, you're not going to have the same success as Socrates. You're not going to be remembered across times and get rich out of talking to people and being a sophist. You simply have to be realistic. So, in a positive way, when we say, we've limited the concept of saying, oh, that person deserves better, I think, just in saying what we've said for now. But if we were to give the situations where you can say that still, after what we've discussed, maybe a good example, and let's see if you're comfortable with this, would be if you're doing something that has a very high chance of resulting in something else. Let's say it's been 5 years, you've been working as just the hardest in your office, and you still haven't gotten a promotion. And usually people get promotions after 3 years, and your boss is biased, but you don't even know about it. It seems to me as though with that kind of 95% success rate, and you're applying all the effort and consciously doing everything that you can to get that promotion, it seems I'm comfortable with saying that you deserve that promotion. Now, of course, the injustices of the world or the injustice of other people seem as part of the environment in which we live. And no one would say, oh, it's so unfair that this tornado happened near my house. But to the same extent, I don't think you can say, oh, it's so unfair that my boss is biased. That's just how people are, right? In your perfect world, well, make it realistic. There's still like 40% of evil people, or whatever you want to call it, right? I think adjusting your expectations to reality, as soon as you tune those very finely, everything seems fair because, well, the environment is going to be the environment and it doesn't care about you. Other people don't care about you. So what's unfair?
Yeah, that's a good comparison with a tornado. That's thoughtful. But I'd say that there is one crucial difference, which is, okay, basically you're saying if you come to expect that people are going to be evil or biased or whatever, then suddenly there's no room for this unfairness, for you to call things unfair, because you already expected it. That's just how the world is. That's what you're going to get. That's what you should expect, right? And I think that there's absolutely no problem at all with thinking that way about a tornado. But when you're thinking about it, when you're thinking of that about people, I think that there is a utility in expecting people to behave in a way that they did not behave. So, for example, if you start thinking, let's say your boss misevaluated your performance in that way for whatever kind of biases, right? If because of that, you feel revolted and you feel angry and you feel like you should have been treated better, and not just you, but everyone around you feels that way, because we all have kind of a common perception of what unfairness is, right? If people in general, on average, feel this way about a certain type of behavior, I think that that actually puts a kind of social pressure on that person to behave better. Even if it's not expressed, people are just aware that they reflect about themselves. They say, okay, I hate it when people do this to me. Therefore, other people hate it when I do this to them. And I think that's useful. I don't think that's an emotion that should be gotten rid of. In fact, I think it's an emotion that we evolved to feel, perhaps, which is adaptive in the way that I just described.
Yeah, and this is one of the factors that we're going to bring up later in the conversation, and it's preventability. If you think it's unjust that the tornado hit your house, the next tornado isn't going to take that into account. But, of course, if you make an effort about injustices in the world, the next boss might take it into account if you take it up with HR or something higher. So, yes, it's, of course, a very adaptive and good feeling.
Yeah, and I think from there, it's your job to take action, right? If your boss is biased, then you have two options, right? If other people feel like you do, then you talk about it with HR, with your boss's bosses, and you prove your point. You prove that you deserve a promotion, and then you take steps towards getting that boss fired or getting him to accept you and see what you've done, like for what it is. Or if that's not changeable, if it's preventable in another way. Your frustration towards the fact that you're not getting promoted is fixable in the sense that you can just leave the company and go to a new one where you can get a higher position for the skills and the efforts that you put in, which you feel you deserve, and in fact probably do, right?
And in addition to preventability, I can introduce the second big factor in our conversation, and it's going to be prior awareness. And this is where I believe that if you're treated badly once, to a certain extent, you don't deserve it, because you didn't know that the boss was biased, and you didn't know that the additional action that you had to put in addition to being a hard worker, is to take it up with HR, or I don't know, office politics, but that's what it is. Now that you're aware of that, and you think, well, no, a normal person should just be working 8 hours a day to get a promotion, so I'm going to do this. But you're aware of the extra thing that you have to do. Here, I think you are to be kind of blamed for your situation. So, just before we get to the negative use of the word deserve, I want to give you an example, because I know you're an avid user of the word king, but here's the thing. I know modern men call themselves king, and this is why it makes me uncomfortable. So let's say I'm just some guy. I go to the gym sometimes. I'm just like kind of at school, doing my job, and you call me king. Now, alternative universe. I'm working 16 hours a day. In 10 years, I made $1 billion. I buy an island. I invite people who want to live under my ruling, and I call myself a king. Okay, you come over, you call me a king. That has a different ring. That seems as though I deserve it now, and this is what bothers me. The fact that I am a man doesn't inherently make me deserve being called a king. And you know, you call me a king, and I'm looking at myself like, oh, I skipped the gym yesterday. I ate cake, and he still calls me that. Am I justified in just being a lazy fuck?
Okay, yeah. So I got to respond to that because that's not. First of all, I'm not exactly an avid user of the word king. People say king all the time, like hey king, but I don't do that. I did say that today when I came through the door of your house because we said we would meet at 3 p.m. exactly, and I came at 3 p.m. exactly, and that was actually a reference to Le Comte de Monte Cristo, which is a book. Yeah, where I remember the main character, he was going to a meeting and the clock strikes exactly at the clock. And then there's a long ding. And at the end of the sound, he enters the room and he says the line, exactitude is the politeness of kings, which is what I said. So I'm very sorry if you feel like you deserve that name, king. But yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. You said you touched on something really, really interesting, but I don't remember. Can you refresh me? What did you say at the beginning of your intervention? It was something about negative deserving. Oh, right. I remember now. It was something about how if you know in advance that there are some steps that you need to take in order to prevent unfair judgment, let's say, then if you don't take those steps, for example, you don't bring it up to HR despite the fact that you know that you should. If you don't do that, then in a way you deserve what's coming for you, right? Even if we don't live in an ideal world and you should just be working and getting paid fairly without doing any of this, right? But I think here I kind of agree with you, but I don't think that we should be talking about desserts in this case, because this is one of the places where people get sensitive about the topic, and notably, what's coming to my mind right now is the Me Too movement and how people are talking about women who dress scantily, right? And how because they dress scantily, they kind of have it coming, what's coming for them, right? And in this context, I think instead of talking about whether they deserve what's coming for them or not, given what measures they took or didn't take to prevent harm, I think it's better not to talk about desserts and just to talk about, okay, you don't deserve any of this. Nonetheless, this is the reality. What can we do? How can we do our best to prevent this from happening in the future? Right. And I just think that's a more tactical way of talking about it, even though you can very easily think about it as, you know, you knew you didn't do it, so you kind of deserve it. But I think it's better to talk about it in the way that I said. Like, you don't deserve any of this, but nonetheless, let's see what we can do. Because it doesn't change anything, right? The way you phrase it. In this case, in my opinion. So, I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. To the people with the extreme view in the example that you brought up, who would liberally use the term, you deserved that, I wanted to identify the exact things that they're trying to establish. And these are the two factors that I presented earlier. It was prior awareness and preventability. You know that doing a certain action will increase the risk of something because that's common sense. You know, quite often the example that is used here is you go into a bad neighborhood and you flash around stacks of money. Are you the bad guy for getting robbed? Absolutely not. There's not one inherently bad thing that you did. But I think there's kind of a, you know, on the sliding scale from you didn't deserve it to you deserved it, there's some point there that isn't on any of the extremes where you're situated. And to me, if using the phrase, this is what you deserve, means something more than you were priorly aware of it, you could have prevented it. If it means something more than that, then I'm very comfortable being very far from the you deserve it, right? On the scale. And this is kind of the whole point of the conversation. That's, that's the way we most commonly use it. I have two thought experiments which isolate prior awareness, which isolate preventability. We can talk about those.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I think there is a real difference, because I just thought of a scenario where that's obviously the case. So let's say you're walking in a neighborhood, which is not high crime, right, in particular, but you end up being stabbed. Someone could say that you should have been walking in that neighborhood with armor on, right? And it's true that that would have prevented getting stabbed in any place. But nonetheless, can we say that they deserved it? So I think now the question is not what can you do to prevent what's coming for you, despite it being unfair, but rather what's a reasonable sacrifice to make in order to prevent that injustice from happening? And I think in the case of Me Too women, once again, okay, let's take the office example first. I think in the case of the office example, it's very obvious that there's no cost to you reaching out to HR. It's reasonably expected that you should do that. But I think in the case of women dressing scampily, I personally don't see a big sacrifice in that, but it seems to me that many women see that as too big a sacrifice to be expected of them. And if I see it a certain way, I can kind of come to understand how you can be of the mind which says, okay, how the heck do I live in a place where I can't even dress how I want in order to prevent someone else from doing this? Right? It's not a perspective I agree with. I think clothes are not that big a deal, and I think that if your intention with dressing scampily is to attract men, then that's sinful to begin with. But that's a different conversation. So yeah, that's my input on that for now.
Okay, here, the problem about bringing up the office example again is, the problem about your example is that I don't think there's a prior awareness, in the sense that it is very reasonable to walk in any neighborhood without increasing your risk of getting stabbed. Of course, yeah, you having done something bad doesn't even come into the conversation in the example that you gave. Now, of course, you then talked about increasing the risk. Now, knowingly increasing the risk of something bad happening to you, I think this is the precise language we should be using. It's not just being aware that it could happen. I mean, an asteroid could fall on me right now and I could be blamed for being in this position. That doesn't seem reasonable. So it's about, did I do something knowingly to increase? And of course, was the thing that I did worth the increased risk? And it seems as though it's a personal thing. Now, of course, in establishing a perfect world, I could say, yeah, we could, educate the young men to not do all these things. But again, if we want to kind of ground that and say, let's say the evil people listen to our podcast. Let's say the women you referred to listen to our podcast. How can we make the world better right now? Is something more real? Is it more realistic that I'm going to re-educate evil people through the words of Socrates or God, or is it more? Is it more realistic that we can, introduce this concept of, am I aware that I'm increasing my risk of being hurt through doing something that isn't worth the things that it gives me, right? And again, you kind of laid it out perfectly.
Yeah, I think you touched on a point that we can all agree there, is that at the end of the day, whether it's worth it for you to eliminate that risk is a matter of personal preference. Right. It's just a matter of making people aware of the risks they're assuming and letting them decide what to do from there. So I agree on that synthesis. Chris
was holding back very bad to not say Socrates, God, or Chris from Thinking Bros. I think what we can take from like the last couple minutes of discussion is that maybe we've discovered that deserving something is sort of on a scale of you deserve it or not, and it can slide depending on many factors, right? Because there's prior knowledge, as Chris said, but there's also probability associated with that. So if you're walking through a neighborhood where you have a 10% chance of getting robbed, you can't be reasonably expected to like take preventative measures. And then there's also the measures you can take to prevent them, and your personal preferences, which aren't the same for everyone. So maybe blameworthiness is not or dessert and blameworthiness is not the same for everyone, because someone just can't go past their personal preferences, whereas someone else could. So it really changes a lot, and it depends on your personality and the situation and many factors.
So, okay, let's establish this model that I've composed of accountability. And I think it's simply the addition of prior awareness of the increased risk and preventability. So let's isolate each element. Let me tell a story about that my girlfriend told me about a cashier that told her this story while he or she was scanning the products. The cashier went to a smoothie place, and the girl who was working there wanted to save time and didn't use the ice scoop to scoop the ice into the smoothie glass. And one day, that method proved inefficient, and a piece of the glass broke into the smoothie. And then the smoothie was made, no one noticed, and the cashier drank the smoothie with the broken glass and went to the ER because of internal bleeding. That's where blood should be, but whatever. So, in any case, to me, it seems reasonable that it could be argued that you wouldn't expect the glass to break, or at the very least, you would expect yourself to notice when it does, if you're using that method that saves you time for scooping the icicles into the glass. But it happened. So it is my intuition that it's not the fault of the smoothie maker, truly, because the awareness wasn't present. And it could be argued that she absolutely didn't even see a risk in it. But something very, very bad happened, and someone drank glass, which is horrible. But to the same extent as your house got hit by a tornado, it's certainly preventable now that she knows, which is where it comes from, right? Accountability comes from prior awareness. If it happens a second time, I am going to blame her for it. But the first time, no, right? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, I would also classify that along with the tornado, right? And you can also think, what if a piece of meteor fell in the ice cream and nobody noticed, right? Then it's not her fault. It's just that in this case, it seems like it's her fault because it's her arm that created that movement which did it. But I think, and here's where something really interesting comes in, I think this is because of how the English language is arranged. Because in the English language, if you have somebody who's, let's say you have somebody who loses their balance and tips over a jar, what do you say? You say that person tipped over the jar, even if it's not their fault. Whereas in Spanish, for example, you would say that the jar fell itself. Right? So it sounds a lot more accidental. You would say something like, el vaso se cayó, for the people who know Spanish. And I think this is an example. I think there was some research done on this, although I'm not entirely sure, which showed that language does affect people's perception of stuff in this way. So, we're talking a lot about how should people perceive desserts at the end of the day. And how people deserve the things they do. But we should also talk about what impacts people's perception of how you deserve things, right? Another example, and the most striking example to me of a perfectly irrational attribution of deserving is when I'm in traffic, when I'm about to be late to a meeting versus when I'm not about to be late to a meeting. So if I'm not about to be late in the meeting, I'm like, whatever. Let's say someone cuts me off. I say, it's not your fault. You're just driving, right? But let's say I feel the time pressure, right? And along with that time pressure, I feel the need to also externalize that blame on someone else, right? Then I'm way more tempted to say, man, screw that driver who cut me over. He broke the laws of morality and I shouldn't be here, whatever, right? So
I think that's a good point of personal characteristics that change the way you attribute blame. But I think in that case of the smoothie maker lady, there's more to consider, right? Because I think it cuts into preventability a bit, or maybe personal responsibility, in the sense that she has a job and there's a procedure to follow, right, to make that smoothie. The ice scoop is there to be used. The company put it there for that reason. And the fact that she ignored procedure, presumably, if that's a procedure to put the ice in, makes her sort of responsible, because she takes on more responsibility as soon as she goes into the job as a smoothie maker, right? She's responsible for something people ingest. So my intuition is that she is blameworthy to some extent. You know, as we said, it's relative. She's not that blameworthy, and she's not a bad person in that sense. She probably should be punished, though, because her recklessness caused something, or like fired from the job or something, right? Because I don't know, I wouldn't have done that because I would have used the scoop. I don't know. What do you think?
We had this discussion earlier about how this is an imperfect example. It's just an example that I had in my mind that I learned about recently. And you said that it cuts into preventability. The point of my examples, and the next one is going to do the same, is to completely give preventability. It's a preventable thing. A tornado hitting your house isn't a preventable thing. Yes, it's a preventable thing. Now, was there prior awareness? And here's where, of course, it gets more complex. What if the person who trained her for a job was also using this more efficient method of glass scooping, right? We don't know. To that extent, yeah, we can talk about if she was priorly warned by her boss to use the ice scoop, then yes, she should be punished. But this is where it bumps up the prior awareness from 0 to not 0. And the extent to which she was aware that that was a risk is the extent to which she deserves to be punished. I tried to reduce it to a 0 because it is imaginable a world in which she absolutely didn't see that as a bad procedure, and she just wanted to save time. So, yeah.
My problem is just with because it seems like let's say it's a mason jar. I wouldn't expect a mason jar to break on ice. But if the jar, is or like the cup is thinner and it breaks easier, then she should be expected. But to isolate your example, I could say, would you say this example is equivalent? Let's say she does use the procedure. She has no reason to expect anything to happen. She scoops the ice in, but she like throws it a bit too hard or something, and then the glass breaks and the same thing happens. I definitely don't think she's to blame, right? I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter here of whether she followed the procedure or not, right? Because there's all kinds of rules in life. Sometimes we take shortcuts, it's just perfectly human. And I don't believe in this black and white kind of thinking in general, because you can just as easily ask the question, is it the waitress's fault for smacking the glass? Or maybe it's the glass producer's fault for making the glass too thin. So then, was the glass producer expected to expect that this glass would be used in an ice cream, making kind of shop, and waitresses kind of break the rules? So for me, it's not a question of, did you follow the rules that were established for you or not? And if they were, then you're accountable. If they weren't, then it's not your fault. To me, it's more a question of how reasonably, as Christian said, how reasonably can you be expected to understand the consequences of your actions, or to expect that something might go wrong from this deviation or that deviation of the procedure, right? So
100%. I think it's about common sense. And what I wanted to say through the way she was trained at her work is because my common sense would be the glass isn't going to break from some ice cubes. But now if we introduce the additional training module in which she was warned against it, then it kind of bumps the prior awareness from 0 to something that isn't 0. So yeah, I do think it's about coming in, as we discussed in our episode on intentionality. I think with the information that you have available for you, if you're doing something that doesn't have the risk, it doesn't have any risk, then that is reasonable and isn't morally punishable. Now, you remember the case about Alex something, the guy who was on a movie set and wasn't supposed to have a real gun and shot the person, right? I know there are some shady things about that case where he wasn't supposed to really pull the trigger on a fake gun and things like that, but in another way, to the extent that he 100% knew in his brain that wasn't a real gun, how could he ever be blamed for even juggling the gun and playing around and shooting everyone? Like, I don't see a world in which he is to blame, if you, of course, isolate the if you give me the fact that he absolutely did not know that it wasn't a prop, right?
Okay, that's an interesting addition because now I'm going to update what I said before. So I think now I'm thinking that it depends on the purpose of the rule, right? So Plato said that laws should come with explanations of why the law is there. So in this case, did the explanation of why you should scoop the ice cream, did it have anything to do with glass breaking, or was it just for aesthetic purposes? Right? If it was for aesthetic purposes, I'd argue that's completely disconnected. So in the same way with the gun example, there actually are gun rules to abide by, which apply even if you're not using a real gun. If you're just using something which looks like a gun, it is general good practice to not point it at anyone and to not play around with it like you're a kid. Right? And I know that there was this other example of a guy who I don't know, shot himself or shot someone next to him in the front car seat because they thought the gun had a safety on and they were playing around with it. Well, that was a real gun, so you could argue it's a totally different example. But in general, with gun-looking things, I have friends who play with BB guns, and I tell them, guys, gun rules apply to all guns, real, fake, or BB. Right? Don't point it. There's no reason to. So now I think you might say, did the guy know about those gun rules? Which is a tough question, because if you don't enforce the rules, despite people not knowing them, if you don't enforce them, then people can always pull the card of, oh, I just didn't know, and people also are not going to feel obligated to inform themselves about gun rules, right? So I don't know. That's a really tricky case that I think is really for a judge to judge at this point.
To be fair, I didn't even know, but just as you're saying it, it does make sense, because it is the most dangerous thing in the world to be able to pull the trigger and literally end someone's life. But if you were to kind of just make another hypothetical and make that example into something else that it much more enforces my point, where you know how actors are given retractable blades on their knives and they're supposed to stab people in movies? Well, what if someone in the assembly of the props is just a crazy person and they tell themselves, you know what, it's going to be fun to give them a real knife. The actor just takes the knife, stabs the person. I know it's very human to say, look, whatever it is, I don't care about moral judgment, I don't care about laws. In some way, the actor who killed another person is to be blamed. I know it's very human, but I deeply disagree with it, right? Upon giving it thought.
Yeah, no, I disagree with it either. In that case, all the blame that you feel can safely be put on the maker of that knife, right? Because whenever actors step on a set, in a way, they kind of, I don't know if they agree to the risk of actually getting stabbed, but they agree to whatever risks shooting the film may involve, right? Maybe they're hitting each other or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I'm on the same page as you, but I'm not sure how to explain why.
Okay, let's just go to the next example that I have, which puts preventability at 0, but prior awareness, it is still there. So it's a little bit of a modification of the waving your money around in an unsafe neighborhood example. And it's, you're at a hospital, a doctor has broken the Hippocratic Oath, and they want payment before they treat your dying grandma. You need $50,000 in the next 20 minutes. And the only way you're going to get there is to cut through a bad neighborhood, run to your house because you didn't come with a car, and get the money that is in your safe, and you have to bring it. You, of course, get robbed while you're in the bad neighborhood. You did something that increased the odds of you getting robbed, right? You're going to run with a suitcase full of money in a bad neighborhood. So the prior awareness of your risk and the augmentation of your risk was there. Yes, you could have gone around that neighborhood. So you did something with awareness that augmented your risk. Now, was it preventable? Well, I would say for a loved one, I would certainly take the 90% odds of getting robbed to have the 10% chance of saving them, if that is the only way. And I think it cuts back to something you said earlier, Phil, which was, is the payout of augmenting the risk worth it? In my example, it certainly is. So I think that's the nuance you have to bring to a case with prior awareness, but the preventability factor kind of is a switch that maybe there's a better term than preventability that takes into account the the output of your actions versus the extent to which you augment your risk through the action? Yeah, maybe necessity would be a good one.
These are good questions, man. I mean, oh yeah. I was saying that these are good questions, man. And boy, I mean, the first thing, like, ignoring all the philosophy, the first thing that I feel when you tell me about this situation is that, man, this guy's going through a rough time. You know?
That's very perceptive, Phil. That's why I invited you, actually.
Thank you. I'm very glad I could be of some unique use. So, like, what a rough time. And really, I mean it, because not everyone is put through such a rough time. Like, I think when people are put through such a rough time, there is some room for forgiveness, so to speak. And I'm expressing myself very loosely here, like, but you know, let's say someone in the first place is put in the position of this kind of emergency where they have to save their grandmother and rush to their house or else, then they might make 1,000 bunch of stupid mistakes on their way to the house. And I think it's just very natural for us to look at that from the outside and say, man, he made a bunch of stupid decisions, which, taken out of this context, we might count as stupid and deserving of punishment. But in this context, where the guy is just doing whatever he can, essentially, I think I would feel very comfortable supporting that guy and paying for his GoFundMe. Because that's why we're asking the question at the end of the day, right? Is why do we care about why people deserve stuff? Is to know whether we should punish them or support them or etc. And in this situation, I feel very strongly that, you know, life just sucks sometimes. And someone has to pay the price. And if it's this guy because he deserves it, well, whatever, I'd still be willing to support him, because it's tough, man.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point that life just sucks sometimes, because as I am trying to enforce here, the evils of others are part of the environment. I would love to, you know, hope that philosophy, laws, the court of law, awareness, campaigns, everything is leading us to a better world. But in truth, I do believe in the yin and the yang of the universe. I do believe there will always be evil. Yes, it is the job of the good people to make maximal amounts of efforts to prevent it. But I also think it's the job of the good people to do what is reasonable to avoid it, right? Because it will always be there. Now we come back to the waving your money around example. Did the flexing or feeling good about how rich you are outweigh the risk of absolutely you're going to get robbed? To me, no. The earlier example, yes, I would love for people to be able to dress in absolutely any way they want. I would love for them to be able to wear chains and not have bodyguards, right? $100,000 chains and not have bodyguards. But that's why rappers do it. That's why they get bodyguards, because the evil of the world is true. The environment is what it is. Life is what it is. And to a certain extent, they know that if they don't do it, the bad thing is going to happen to them. So I think preventability here is a pretty good argument for, if you can not increase your risk, you probably should. That would be kind of my partial conclusion about this.
I think that's a good point you bring up. And there's also another factor at play here, which is what we said in the beginning, which is, what about people with disabilities? Do they deserve the help? What about people who are extremely poor? Do they deserve to just be helped? You know, let's say they're poor, not of their own fault or anything. Do they just deserve this boost? And I think that's what is at play here with this guy's situation, whose grandmother is dying. He's like a disabled person who needs help in a way. And the reason we do that is because, well, people who have nothing benefit a lot more from an extra dollar than you would, right? If you're in a desert, you would benefit much more from a water bottle than someone who owns a water bottle company, right?
Yes.
Oh, so thanks for that. So yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm pretty comfortable with what we said about deserving stuff. I think it's a little bit overused in the positive sense, because life is what it is. And to the same extent, it's misused in the negative sense, because life is what it is. Now, I would like to distinguish it from blameworthiness, right? I think there's something there. To me, blameworthiness was the precursor to you deserving something. So if you deserve something bad, you're blameworthy for the things that led to it. Now, I wouldn't be as comfortable casting blameworthiness on the person who is waving money around as I would be on casting blameworthiness on someone who has done something inherently bad. Right? That's the interesting thing about the person waving money around in a bad neighborhood. They haven't done anything bad. Could you be possibly blameworthy for something not inherently bad? That's what interests me. Do you have any thoughts on the contrast between desert and blameworthiness?
These are good questions. And again, I think now more than ever is a really crucial moment to think about what is the point of blameworthiness, right? What is the effect? So I already mentioned that one consequence of blameworthiness is to know who we should punish and who we should reward in order to get to a better state of affairs, right? But blameworthiness also produces self-reflection, right? So if you feel guilty for something, or if you feel like people are blaming you for something, that's going to drive you to change your behavior in some way, right? So for example, with the scantily dressed women, if they feel like they're being blamed, that might, for better or for worse, that might make them feel pressured to dress in a way that's more modest, right? And now here, this is where things get potentially religious, because I believe that any opportunity, you can't do enough self-reflection, so to speak. Any opportunity, like anytime someone out there does something that's evil or does something that's bad, in a way, that's a reflection of yourself, right? That's like, a lot of people say, oh, look at that guy who's high in power and who is corrupt and who's ruining a bunch of people's lives as a result. Martin Shkreli, for example, he bought the patent to some drug and he hiked it up a bunch, the price, and now a bunch of people couldn't afford it or were ruined because they bought it. And they didn't have that much money. So, and a lot of people dissociate from that, right? They say, oh, this guy, Martin Shkreli, whatever, I would never do that. Basically, I would never do that if I was in power. But Ragnar said, from Vikings, he said that power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. And I think that's, you can't be too careful about that. So to get back to your original question, how does the innocence of your crime impact how blameworthy you should feel? I think that that's a tough question, but I think that any situation is an opportunity for self-reflection and for self-improvement. And that the more people self-reflect, the better that is, because everyone's a sinner at the end of the day, or everyone makes mistakes, everyone has a blind spot. And that's how I'd answer that for now. I don't know what your thoughts are.
To me, I never think it's productive to make people feel bad. So these words that are thrown around, blameworthy, I have thought a lot about this. I'm reading my book. I'm writing my book, and I've thought about when Socrates said that a good person must never do evil, whether it's to a good person or a bad person. And to me, that kind of bugged me, because if you're doing the evil, let's say you determine that lying is evil. I don't like lying, but you lie to a bad person and you decrease their ability to do something bad directly. Like there's a Kant example where, Kantianism is so absolute about lying that you should tell the exact location of your friend that is hiding in your backyard to a serial killer just because you don't want to lie to him. That feels bad. If you determine that lying is bad, I think even if you do, you can do the bad thing to bad people. Let's say you could hit them when they're running after a satchel. Hitting someone is probably inherently bad, but if they're running after someone trying to steal their belongings, the bad thing seems warranted. So now, I don't think it's useful to use blameworthiness in the sense that I'm going to, because I haven't determined if making bad people feel bad is productive in the sense that it reduces the bad. I don't know about that, but I'm not about using the word blameworthiness or, oh, you deserve that in a negative sense, in the sense that I want to do something bad to them. I am about using them in a practical way, in a legal way. And legally, what blameworthiness would mean, and I think it's a synthesis of what you said about who am I going to punish and what are the reflections that I'm going to have about this situation. So that's awesome. For me, the synthesis of that is simply future preventability. If you think about the things that you've done and you redo the same things, now some people say insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting a different result. We looked it up. That's not what it means, but it still rings true. So to the extent that you can prevent something in the future from happening, I think you should change your ways. Can the evil of the world be blamed for you repeating this exact same action that previously had a bad result for you and expecting a different result? I'm not comfortable with that conclusion. And as for who should be punished, well, the wrongdoer should be punished. But if you redo the same mistake, well, the reaction of your environment is going to be punishment enough. That's where you're going to find out quite soon.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, I very urgently feel the need to correct what I said earlier because I realized I was being very untactical and it's actually might have been misperceived. So what I actually meant was not that we should make people feel bad no matter what they do, or that it's our job to make other people feel bad. Because now there's two aspects to blameworthiness. Number one is, what should people around you think of this and how should they react to what you're doing? But number two is, how do you in your inner self feel about what you did? And what I meant to say is not that people around you should feel, not that kind of blameworthiness where, I'm going to tell you all your faults and et cetera, whatever, right? I mean, even from a religious perspective, that's not unfounded. Jesus said, take the timber out of your own eye before taking the dust out of your neighbor's eye. What I actually meant was, you yourself, if what I'm saying resonates with you, then you take as many opportunities as you can to see how you could go wrong from this. That's it. And basically that, I think that goes hand in hand with what you were saying, which is always seek ways in which you can prevent it in the future, right? I'm not saying anything fundamentally different. So sorry if it seemed a certain way. I realize how it might have been perceived. But yeah, that's my point on that. Moving on, you said something after about... Oh, okay. Actually, I remember you said something about, is the evil of the world to blame for your second mistake, so to speak. And here, I think things get weird because the evil in the world, right? What is that? Is it just a bunch of evil that's out there and that's separate from you? In a way, all this evil was caused by people who are just like you internally, right? They may have been raised in different circumstances, and I don't know, you might even believe that they're different internally. I don't believe that. I believe that if you were put in the same situation as another person was put, and you marvel at their evil, I think you shouldn't be surprised to find out that you would do the same evil if you were put in that exact same situation, right? And that's why I believe that when you think about how you've been wronged by the world, or regardless of whether it's your fault or not, again, I emphasize that's an opportunity for you to kind of marvel at your own evil, because that's you in a way, acting in that way. It's just you put in a different circumstance. So that's how I think about these things, and that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up. I don't know what you think about that. And sorry if I missed a point that you said earlier. There was a lot said.
Yeah, no, I love that. I have always said that you don't know anyone until you push them to an extreme, right? This is why people break up after 4 years. I mean, they've been at their little high school, they've done their, beginning of the university, nothing happens in their lives. Boom. They're having a bad time, they feel lonely. Another person that they're attracted to enters their life. They have a decision to make about their career. This is where you discover who a person is. And to the same extent, yeah, it's very easy for us to sit in our cocoon and be like, I would never kill anyone. Okay, how about they're about to kill your family? Would you kill someone? Well, of course. Okay, well, how about a different situation, or the situation that the person was in? Of course. So I like that. And to the extent that you caused the situation that the other person was in, and the person in that situation reasonably acted as to do something bad, I think that is very insightful about, well, I can't be blamed for this. I didn't do the inherently wrong thing. Well, that's very easy to say, but you caused the situation in which someone did a wrong thing. Is there some responsibility to take there? And that's the next question, isn't it? And just to not leave that question hanging, I think the answer to should you get punished by society for that action is absolutely not. But do you have a responsibility in preventing it next time? Yes. So when you take the higher perspective, your responsibility simply becomes to, well, okay, prior awareness was added to me now that I've been through this situation. That gives me more accountability for the next time it happens.
I think it has to do with your motivations in going into that situation a second time, right? If your motivation is you have to save your grandma and you have to run 10 minutes to and back through a bad neighborhood, your motivations are pure. And even though you were robbed before, there's nothing you could have done, You don't have bad motive in doing that. But if your motive in going back into the situation where you're probably going to get messed up by the world is like, oh, I want to show how unfair the world is and I'm going to complain about it and everything, like, your motivations are wrong in doing that, and you could prevent that, and so you're blameworthy in that sense. But if your motivations are right and you're fighting for your freedom and you're going into a situation, doing it again and knowing you're going to get a bad result just to, show that the world is evil, and in the sense that you're trying to promote change and you don't, feel bitter about the world and you just want to create change in a positive sense, then that's different.
That's a very good point you just touched on, which I relate to a lot, which is feeling like the world is unfair and like it's done you wrong. And so you're gonna destroy it or make it suffer, right? Yeah. And I think the only way to overcome that, or at least for me, the only way for me to overcome that was to force myself to put myself in the shoes of those who do wrong, which is extremely difficult to do, and I still haven't completely resolved all my issues with the world, right? But to put myself in those shoes and to understand, because rationally I understand that I would have been doing the same thing in their shoes, but it's hard to accept emotionally, right? And that's why I resonate with this quote by Dostoevsky, which I wanted to bring up earlier, which is, and by the way, this it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not. This quote, if you make the effort to understand the sentiment behind it, has a lot of wealth to be extracted. And so it goes like this. There is only one way to salvation. Again, doesn't matter if you believe in salvation or not, but there is only one way to salvation, and that is to make yourself responsible for all men's sins. Which basically, you can rephrase that in a secular way as saying, there is only one way to putting yourself on the right path, to working for the good, as you said, and not being bitter. There's only one way to put yourself on that right path and doing the right thing. And that is to have so much empathy and so much capability to put yourself in another's shoes that you see how the conditions for evil in another could have arisen in yourself. So yeah, I think that summarizes it well. I don't quite remember where we came from, but take it and run, I guess.
I love it. It's ultimate accountability, right? Yeah. I was born with one leg. Okay, well, I'm going to do everything that a person with one leg can do in this world. It's not like, oh, the universe is against me. And I'd love to have you on for a second episode where we have a theory we want to develop about a generation of victims. Essentially, it's about how the commodities that have appeared in our world have made it profitable more profitable for you to, instead of going out there and fighting the world, because before it was humans versus environment, now that it's like, oh, I have to click a button and my food is going to be heated. I have to go to the supermarket and now I have food. Because of all these commodities, the people who proliferate in such an environment are the people who can victimize themselves the most. So, it's like, oh, what if I'm on the very edge of a spectrum of being diagnosed with ADHD, and I could do the exam in normal time, but you know what? I'm going to get that diagnosis and I'm going to get the extra hour in the, to have for my exam. So I think that would be a cure to that. And you can arrive to it in a religious sense. You can arrive at it in a philosophical sense, where it's like, well, the environment is the environment. It doesn't care about me. Even other people are kind of the environment. So what I have to do, or what happens to me, is under my control. And that's the reality of things. And I think uncontrollable factors are exaggerated. A lot of people victimize themselves and say, oh, this boss, this job, okay, quit it, right? Just quit it. Okay, well, but no, the difficulties of quitting it would be this is, okay, well, do you want to complain for the rest of your life? Or do you want to take the risk of being unemployed just to live a happy life? These are the realities of the world. And I think when you live in a generation where the entire world is at your fingertips, it's very hard to see that. Because guess who cared about you being slightly depressed in the 1800s? Guess who cared? Not one person. Right? So I think that kind of puts it into contrast. Now it's like, well, no, we're going to get paid for therapy. I'm going to sit in a chair for a week. You used to have to fix things. And if you rewind humanity to when it was against the world, I don't think cavemen I don't think they had the reflections of like, you know what? Our region is overrun with bears. This is so unfair. I have to change camps every night. So I certainly think the misuse of the word deserve and the extent to which people think things are uncontrollable in their lives is a symptom of our society. I'm sure you'd agree with that to a certain sense. So there you go. I'm pretty happy with the way we said.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because increasingly our threats are human. So if it's bears, they don't care if you're pitting yourself in the corner, right? But if it's humans, you might expect that if you're pitting yourself and also being really angry at them, that you might change something, or you might change people's attitude about something, right? And I think this is really funny, because I think the solution to this, which sounds dark, but it's true. I think people need to learn how to lose hope. In the sense that if you have a baby and he's throwing a temper tantrum, he's throwing it because you're there giving him attention, right? But if you've ever taken counseling courses, you know that the best way to calm a baby down from that tantrum is to leave and make the baby lose hope that whatever he's doing is ineffective, totally ineffective. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, there's this anecdote of this one girl who was on a plane with her mother. I don't remember where I heard this, but they crash landed, and the girl survived. A bunch of people around her burning. Her mother died on that trip, and the next week or something she was working. And nowadays people around her would ask, you're not taking any time off work? You don't need any therapy? Well, what do you need? And she was like, I got to do what I got to do. Now, who knows what mental state she was in, right? You can argue it wasn't optimal, but I think there's value to this. There's value to knowing when to lose hope, or rather knowing when to move on.
100%. It's like, oh, you know what? The injustices of the world are going to fix themselves. My boss is going to love me tomorrow. It will fix itself by itself. Of course not. And there's this clip, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you're going to love it, of a politician who arrives a little bit late to a speech he was going to give. And he starts it with, I'm sorry for my late arrival, my wife just died, and keeps on giving the speech. And I think to a certain extent that it's powerful, and I think it's something that a lot of people are missing. And it seems as though every episode we quote or refer to David Goggins, but he says, the only thing that will change your genes is discipline. And, there's psychological studies about how it's inherited, how introverted you are. Okay, go outside. Go outside and meet some people and be very scared and overcome your fears. It doesn't matter. Everything is under your control. That's the thing.
And there's a scientific concept to that too, right? Epigenetics is the modification of the genetic expression, which gets changed through the environment. So there's some scientific truth to that, and also it just makes sense intuitively. I think we strayed off blameworthiness and dessert so much, but it's just a good discussion. And yeah, I feel like another episode could be good on the victim society, because I feel like this discussion led into responsibility and what you can do to change the world around you in a positive way. I think it's very interesting. But we're coming to an end.
Yeah, unless you want to say something more, Phil. We do one sentence summaries. I would say everyone deserves most of the things they have in their life, because the interaction of your efforts and the environment is usually just. Now, the people who have uncontrollable factors, such as being born in a country where water is absolutely not even available, I think there's... Well, that's not a one-sentence summary, but... I think there are a lot of limitations to what I'm saying, only if basic human needs are unfulfilled and out of your control. That is my conclusion. If you want to give it one, Phil, no? Anything to supplement that?
I don't think I can give a one-sentence summary. I think it's going to devolve into whatever happened there. So I'm going to leave it at that. I like it.
Yeah, I think a one-sentence summary is impossible, but I think the discussion was very interesting. And, to what you said last, there's also the nuance to add that if something is happening for the first time and you don't have prior knowledge, you don't deserve it. So there's a lot of nuance. And I think if you want a summary, just listen to the episode on 2 times speed again, and then you'll get the summary, dude. But yeah, as to the figured it out rating, are you aware of the figured it out rating?
Figured it out rating?
Yes, at the end of each episode, we do a figured it out rating out of 10, and we're going to go through each person and talk about it. I think it was a very productive discussion, and I'm usually the hater and the one that puts down the grade. But today I'm going to go with a solid 9, because I think, we agreed a lot, but there was also some healthy disagreement where we went back on some things the other person said, and we developed the ideas a lot. And I think the structure you gave of prior knowledge and preventability, or some other things we said, is a very good structure to conceptualize dessert. And I don't know, I think it was just a very productive discussion. Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna say 9 because I like dessert.
I'm gonna say 9 as well. Also because I like dessert, but also because, there were some good laughs, good gags, and also the questions were quite rigorous. I felt like they really pushed and tested our intuitions about dessert. And I always appreciate a good, rigorous conversation full of laughs. What more do you want? 9 or 10 out of 10?
I love it. That was heartwarming. Thanks a lot for Phil for coming through. If you want more information, go on thinkinbros.com or contact us at thinkinbros@gmail.com, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
See ya!